Hello Year 11 and welcome to your feedback lesson. The purpose of this video is to go through feedback from the two assessments that you completed this week on rivers and coasts and then resource management. The questions that I go through relate to a PDF that you also have access to, so you might want to have open those PDFs at the same time, or you might choose to watch this video in isolation and then come back to it when you have the PDFs open. So the first questions that we're going to look at are on rivers and coasts. So question 6 is the first question we're going to look at, as questions 1 to 5 were keyword questions. Now please check when you look at your keyword questions and you look at the answers, it might come up on its learning as being wrong. However, if you have made a question plural or an answer plural, so you've said levee instead of levees, I will still give you the answer or the mark, okay? So when you're checking your scores on its learning, it may be saying it's wrong when in truth, you've actually been given the mark. So don't worry about that. If you feel that you want to know your overall score as a result of that, then please send me a message and I'll give you it. So question number 6 then was looking at a photograph showing a waterfall at high force on the River Tees. And the photograph is shown on the next slide. And what you had to do is use figure 16. So, you might want to have boxed figure 16 and explain the processes involved in the formation of the landforms shown. Now, the hint here is that it says landforms. So you need to talk about waterfalls and also gorges. Okay, now when we're explaining, we're saying why. We aren't describing the process, although you might want to do that, but you need to talk about how things have happened. So processes, we're going to need to talk about weathering. We're going to need to talk about erosion. Okay, so to ensure that we got our full marks, we need to make sure that when we include keywords, we define them. So for example, vertical erosion, well, what is that? We need to know what that term means. So vertical erosion is when that erosion is cutting through the land, and you get that normally at the source of a waterfall or the source of a river, and it allows that V-shaped valley to be eroded downwards. So that is our term for vertical erosion. Remember, the other term is lateral erosion, and that occurs generally in meanders when it's moving side to side. Our keywords abrasion and hydraulic action are both types of erosion, and remember that if you want to get 6 out of 6, you need to make sure that you define the keywords and not simply mention them, otherwise you will get no more than 4 out of 6, even if your answer is perfect. And then these final 3 words, the plunge pool, the overhang and the gorge, these would have definitely needed to be included to make sure that you access your full marks, especially the gorge, because it refers to another landform instead of just talking about erosion. So first of all, you need to match up the keywords to the correct definition and maybe focus on the ones that you didn't include, or you didn't include because you didn't think they were necessary, or didn't include because you didn't know the definition for them. Okay. Then you will notice that I have given you a perfect answer. Now, it's not a perfect answer. There's lots of ways that you can get 6 out of 6, as you'll be aware from those that did. But I just want to go through some misconceptions and some common issues that arose during the marking of this. So first and foremost, you have to make sure that you say at some point in the figure, or in figure 16, or at the high force waterfall, making reference to that figure, there is a waterfall and a gorge. So straight away, I have mentioned the 2 processes that I am going to explain how they have occurred. Okay, I've also said where they occur. So they occur in the upper course of the river through the processes of erosion and weathering. So I've also here mentioned the processes, and I've mentioned here the landforms. So I'm using keywords that are being mentioned in the question. So what you need to do when you're reading through this, you might want to use separate colours to work out what landform or what part of the success criteria I'm doing at what point. So I'm going to change to a red pen, and I'm going to try and find where I refer and define vertical erosion. A waterfall occurs when a river crosses a bed of more resistant and hard rock. Erosion, usually hydraulic action and abrasion, of less resistant rock underneath eventually undercuts the hard rock. The river's energy creates a hollow at the base of the waterfall, and this is called a plunge pool. Now, if I actually look through, I haven't mentioned vertical erosion, and that's fine. Now, the reason that I don't really need to refer to vertical erosion is because I have talked about it here. I've said that where it's occurring in the upper course of the river and then it cuts through and crosses a riverbed. So it's very clear that it's going to be creating vertical erosion. So, I mean, I didn't do this. So if I haven't defined vertical erosion, then I need to make sure that I refer to and define these types of erosion here. So let's highlight this in red too and try and see where I refer to erosion. The river's energy creates a hollow at the base of the waterfall. This is called a plunge pool. Hydraulic action, so the air becomes trapped in the cracks of the riverbank and bed and causes the rock to break apart. So I've referred to and defined my first type of erosion. An abrasion continues and creates a ledge of hard rock which overhangs. Now here I haven't mentioned the definition for abrasion because I actually define it further along. So once you've defined it once, you don't need to define it again, okay? Now also you need to make sure that you include your keywords, because if you don't include all of your keywords, then you're probably not going to get 6 out of 6. So the keywords, we've got things like a waterfall, we've got a gorge, we have things like retreat, we have collapsing, we have things like plunge pool, a hollow, undercutting, less resistant, hydraulic action, more resistant. So these are all the keywords that I've used throughout to make sure that I'm fully sequencing the formation of the landform. So key things to include. If you have said erosion, so if you mentioned erosion, but you weren't specific, then you would get no more than 3 out of 6. If you mentioned hydraulic action and abrasion, but you didn't define them, then you wouldn't get any more than 4 out of 6. If you then go on to define these keywords, then you will get 6 out of 6. Question 16 then. So now we're looking at rivers. Sorry, now we're looking at coasts. So study figure 12, a sketch map showing features of coastal deposition. So we need to know what this means. This is when sediment is being dropped. So using figure 12 and your own knowledge, explain how different landforms, so we've gone plural again, may be created by the transporting and deposition of sediment along the coast. So explaining, we're saying why, and it wants us to talk about transportation and also deposition. So these are the keywords that we needed to include. Now, if we just flick forwards, I'm not going to go through the definitions because I think that you'll be able to do those, and if you are struggling, you might want to access the keywords which are on the Year 11 landing page. But you needed to make sure that you included all of those keywords in your answer. So let's go through the success criteria, and we first need to make reference to the scale, the direction and the key, because by doing this we are referring to the figure, and that's really important. So straight away it says figure 12 shows depositional landforms such as beaches, spits and bars. So I've already referred to plural landforms. Beaches are made from eroded material that has been transported from elsewhere and then deposited by the sea. So I'm making reference to these key words, eroded material and deposited. This occurs where waves have limited energy, and so the beach is formed in sheltered areas such as bays where wave energy is less than an exposed headland. So I'm giving reasons why why deposition occurs. Now I need to see where I've actually referred to the figure. So, I'm talking here, I've said figure 12 also shows the formation of a spit. Now, I could be more specific here and I could say, well, how long was the spit? So I could have made reference to the scale in kilometers, And then here where I talk about the prevailing winds, I could have mentioned the direction. So if this curve of the spit is going in this direction, then this secondary wind is occurring in a northwesterly direction. However, the direction of the main prevailing wind is in a northeasterly direction. So you need to make sure when you're referring to this, you are using the key. Okay, and it shows you a north arrow and it also shows you a scale. So, where have I explained the process of longshore drift? Because if you don't refer to longshore drift, then you're going to struggle to access the marks. Let's see if we can find it. So it says here, beaches are under constant change from processes such as longshore drift, but I still haven't said how longshore drift occurs. Figure 12 also shows the formation of the spit. Here we go. Spits are created by longshore drift. Eroded material ends up caught within the waves that is carried along the shore in a zigzag fashion. So I'm using keywords to describe longshore drift. The swash, so the keywords that you had to do for the last task, so the swash is when material is moving onto the beach. That's arriving at the beach on a 45-degree angle. And then the backwash is being brought down the beach at a right angle. The angle of the swash is determined by the prevailing wind. So the prevailing wind is when you then could have made reference to the fact that it's happening at a northeasterly direction. Now in that, I have also referred to a spit. So my spit colour can also go down as red. Okay. The sequence of a landform is a little bit more difficult as long as they've said it in order. So they've not said that the backwash occurs first, it's a swash and then the backwash. And all of this has to happen because of the prevailing wind. And then as a result of longshore drift, the spit, the bar is occurring. Now I'm looking for why deposition has occurred, because remember we need to explain why this has happened. So let's see what it says. At the very start, it said here, beaches are made from eroded material that have been transported elsewhere and then deposited by the sea. This occurs where waves have limited energy, so this is why they're being deposited, or because they're in sheltered areas such as bays. It's because the waves are more constructive, so the swash is dominant, meaning that the beach is being built up rather than being taken away. So I've already given loads of reasons why deposition occurs. So within this question, the key points you need to focus on, you need to interact with the figure, okay? Now, I didn't interact with the whole figure. I didn't make reference to the key, really, the direction of the prevailing wind. I mentioned the prevailing wind and I mentioned landmarks that we can see on the figure, but I could have gone into more depth. However, the reason that I missed those out is because it's still possible to get 6 marks without doing that, okay? So whilst you're going through and highlighting these, you might want to annotate in like I've done to add in the bits that I have missed out. So now we're going to move on to look at resource management. So this was the second assessment that you completed, and this relates to figure 2. Paper 2. So question 13 is the first question that we're going to look at, and it says, with help of figures 8 and 9, explain why the processes of fracking for gas cause conflict between different groups of people. Now we need to know what the term fracking means. So fracking, we need to make sure that we can define that to the correct word on here. So it's when they inject liquid at high pressure into rock, so underneath the ground, and it allows us to extract oil or gas. Now we were referring to shale oil, so we need to then look at what shale oil is. We also need to know what the term conflict means because that is a keyword in the question. So let's look at the figure then. So figure 8 and 9, how do we know that there is conflict between different groups of people? Well, first of all, let's look at figure 9, okay? It's clear that areas with existing licenses for fracking, well, there might be pros and cons to this. The pros might be the economics, so the fact that it's going to give lots of jobs. The cons might be things like the negatives that it has on the environment. So if there are any leaks during the fracking process, that can damage ecosystems. It could also be the mini earthquakes that occur in the tremors from the high force of the fracking. Now, areas which are under consideration, it depends on whether they have a lack of jobs there. So, for example, if we think about the Northeast, after the deindustrialization, we had lots of unemployment. So, if this is going to offer employment opportunities to people in the Northeast, then they're going to be very happy about it. Okay then, so let's look at figure 8. So this tells us what fracking is. So fracking or fracturing uses high pressure water mixed with chemicals to shatter shale rocks and release natural gases. Now, what is the problem with natural gases? It might be that an environmentalist is thinking about the impacts of climate change, so they might be against this. It creates environmental concerns, including the possibility of contaminated groundwater, polluted drinking water, air pollution, and earth tremors. So all of these things here are very negative. So these are going to create conflicts with people that disagree that fracking shouldn't be happening. Whereas further on, all of this talks about the positives. It's going to improve employment rates. It means that the electricity can be generated at half of the carbon dioxide of coal. So it's much, even though it's still a form of non-renewable, it's still beneficial because it's better than other types of non-renewable like coal. Okay. So let's read through what I've said then. Now, this was a 6-mark question. So you had to make at least 2 developed points or maybe 3 less developed points to get your full marks. And you had to look at both sides of the argument. So you had to say why people would be for fracking and why people would be against fracking. So that's the first thing that I want you to do. Read through these statements and match them up to the correct development of the points. So fracking allows drilling firms to access difficult to reach resources of oil and gas. So which statement on the right would be a developed point of that? Because if you just keep it at that basic point, you're not going to be able to access your full marks. So if they're able to access difficult to reach resources of oil and gas, then this will boost the production. If they can access more, then it means that there's going to be more available, and this will allow us to reduce the gas prices. If there's limited oil or limited gas or any limited resources, the prices go up. So I think then this would be for fracking. Okay. Let's look at the next one and then we'll move on. Fracking of shale gas could contribute significantly to the UK's future energy needs. It appears from figure 9, so you can see here I've actually made reference to the figures that there are extensive resources which can be tapped into in the future. Okay, so we're talking about the fact it's going to improve and contribute to the future's energy needs and allow us to use resources that can be tapped into the future. We could talk about the fact that this could be beneficial. If it's going to be in the future, that could improve employment rates. So you might refer to this one here. Not only will this improve employment opportunities, but will directly and indirectly involved in fracking, but will also improve the GDP of the UK. If they're able to import or export it, that will allow them to increase the amount of money that they have. So I would also say that that was a 4. Now, if I only made those 2 points in my 6-mark question, I wouldn't be able to access all my marks because I haven't talked about why people would be against it. Remember that it's looking about conflict between different groups of people. So you need to make developed points where you're saying people would be for it and also why people would be against it. The next question that I want to look at then is figures 11 and 12. Now, these were the figures that looked at the population density of the UK and then also looked at the water scarcity of the UK. So we need to be able to include all of these keywords in our answer. So make sure that you know the definitions to these keywords. Otherwise, when you move on to the next activity, it won't make sense, or your answers wouldn't have been as in depth as they could have been. So we need to make sure that we refer to both figures and we need to talk about them together. So we need to compare them. We can't talk about them separately, otherwise we aren't doing what the questions asked us to do. So the first thing we need to do is we need to describe the relationship between densely populated areas and there being a water deficit. Now, straight away you can see in this area of the UK, so we're talking about the south and the southeast, and also a lot of the east, there is very limited rainfall. Okay, now also if you look in these are the areas that have the highest population, so they're more densely populated. So straight away you can see that in the areas where there's less rainfall, the areas are more densely populated, which means that there will be a water deficit. So there's not enough water to supply the demand of the area. Now, if we look at the other side of this, in the north and the northwest, also in the west, the southwest, we have got a significant amount of rainfall. So that means that if we look on the density map, these areas here have they're sparsely distributed, which means that they might have a water surplus, so they have too much water. So if we were talking about where the water needed to be transported to, you would see here what I've said at the end. There is a need for water to be transferred from the north and west to the south and the east. So it's going from this direction down to here. And that makes sense with both maps. It's going from a sparsely populated area to a densely populated area. It's going from an area that receives lots of rainfall to an area that receives not a lot of rainfall. Okay, so then in your question, all I want you to do is go through, use the success criteria to see where I've referred to the figures, to see where I have used actual reference from the figures. So things like the amount of people per square kilometre, the amount of rainfall. I've made reference to the locations within that. And you can do that because each map has a north arrow. Okay, now remember this is only worth 3 marks, so you might have not done everything in the question here, but you had to make sure that you did this bit at the end because the question asked you to give reasons as to where or why where the water transfer needs to happen. So this was a must in order to get your full marks. I hope this video has been helpful. If you're still a little bit confused or unsure, please send me a message on It's Learning and I